The heart-wrenching reality of betrayal can shatter the strongest bonds, leaving individuals grappling with the aftermath of deception. For John, the revelation of his wife Jessica's affair with David was not just a personal crisis, it was the tipping point that forced him to confront the precarious foundation of their marriage. As whispers of infidelity turned into undeniable evidence, John found himself caught in a whirlwind of emotions, ranging from anger to sadness, and finally to a resolve that would lead him down the path of divorce. This tumultuous journey was not just about ending a marriage but about reclaiming his dignity and paving the way for a future that promised newfound freedom and hope. As he navigated the complexities of love, trust, and heartbreak, John was determined to rise above the wreckage and embrace a life filled with possibilities. This story dives deep into the complexities of personal morality, the profound power of forgiveness, and the eternal conflict between heart and mind. It's a piercing, unpredictable narrative that immerses you in a world where each decision can lead to unforeseen consequences. When my phone buzzed on that Thursday afternoon at 4:10 p.m., I had a sinking feeling about the message it would contain, but I looked anyway. As expected, it was from Emerson Burke, my private investigator. The chilling words read, "She's been served." My wife, Martha Harrington, was about to have her world turned upside down. Martha was not just my wife, she was also a devoted mother, a beloved sister, a caring daughter, and a fiercely loyal friend. Professionally, she held the esteemed position of senior partner at Willington & Compton, a prestigious law firm in the Hartford area. With her role came immense responsibility, including managing the caseload of 7 junior partners. Martha conducted 2 mandatory meetings per week for these junior partners, one on Monday mornings at 10 a.m. and the other on Thursday afternoons at 4 p.m. Each meeting started precisely on time, and anyone arriving late would feel the weight of her disapproval throughout the entire session. On that fateful Thursday, the sheriff, acting on my orders, interrupted her meeting just 2 minutes before it was set to start. "Mrs. Harrington," he announced, "your husband is seeking a divorce. You've been officially served." After 23 years of marriage, I knew my wife well enough to predict her reaction. She would feel utterly humiliated to be served in front of her subordinates. However, instead of rushing home to confront me, she would likely retreat to her office, burying herself in her work while meticulously dissecting each word of the divorce petition. As a skilled attorney, I suspected that Martha would find the first reading of the legal papers a bit perplexing. I had listed the classic irreconcilable differences as the reason for the divorce, which would provide her with a slight sense of relief that I hadn't cited adultery. Yet, deep down, she would suspect I knew something about her long-term affair with Michael Kinsley, a married 29-year-old associate at her firm. Compounding her confusion would be the matter of our shared assets. We were set to split the proceeds from the sale of our sprawling 7,300 square foot home and our beachfront summer getaway on the Connecticut shore. Martha would keep her retirement fund, and I would retain mine, while our banking and checking accounts would be divided after settling any debts. Given that we both made substantial incomes, there was no need for alimony. However, when she reached the end of the legal documents, she would be bewildered to discover that my successful third-generation engineering firm wasn't mentioned as an asset. Martha was well aware of my divorce attorney by reputation. She had even recommended her to a few friends in need of similar services over the years. She often remarked that my attorney was a shark in the legal world. Thus, when Martha noticed that such a respected figure would carelessly omit any reference to my business, she would be stunned. She would certainly suspect foul play but be left scratching her head as to what my ulterior motive might be. After a second detailed reading of the petition, Martha would likely call an emergency meeting with her most trusted partners and associates. Together, they would comb through the documents, analyzing every detail to formulate a strategic plan for how to handle the impending divorce. My name is Chris Harrington. I first met Martha during our time at the University of Connecticut. She was a second-year law student, and I was finishing my PhD in mechanical engineering. We started dating just a week after meeting, quickly becoming inseparable. After a delightful dinner on our third date, Martha suggested we head to my apartment. That weekend was a whirlwind of passion. We made love for hours, completely lost in each other. From the outset, we both agreed that we would remain exclusive, never inviting anyone else into our intimate lives. We solidified our commitment to one another during our wedding, which took place just 2 weeks after we both earned our advanced degrees. Our wedding was a grand affair, held in Martha's hometown of Portland, Maine. The reception took place under elegant tents on a warm summer night, overlooking the breathtaking rocky coast of Maine. We honeymooned in Aruba, returning sun-kissed and blissful. 2 weeks after our return, Martha had several job offers from top law firms in Hartford, eventually accepting a position at Willington and Compton. Over the next 2 decades, we fell deeper in love, raised 2 wonderful children, and navigated the challenging responsibilities of balancing career and family life. I took over the reins of our family business when I bought my father's shares upon his retirement 12 years ago. Martha climbed the ranks of her law firm, becoming a junior partner after 7 years and a senior partner after 16. Life was wonderful, until everything began to unravel. Just over 3 years ago, I received an anonymous letter at my office that turned my world upside down. The envelope was marked personal and confidential, and when I opened it, I found a folded piece of notebook paper that read, "Your wife is ducking Michael Kinsley." Inside, there was a photo of Martha and Michael standing in the open doorway of what looked like a motel. Overwhelmed with disbelief and betrayal, I knew I had to act. I hired a highly recommended private investigator, and within 2 months, I had amassed a grotesque amount of evidence of Martha's infidelity. For a month, I grappled with my emotions, planning my next steps while pretending to be a loving husband and a supportive friend. Finally, I assembled my team, a private investigator, a divorce attorney, a business attorney, and a personal accountant. I outlined my objectives clearly, explaining that this process could take years to finalize. Their primary task was to ensure that every step I took was legal and couldn't be used against me in the divorce. As I awaited the next text from Emerson, which came through just 10 minutes before 6 p.m. that same evening, I braced myself for the turmoil that was about to unfold. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a battle that would test the very fabric of our lives and challenge everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and the human heart. Michael Kinsley had just been served, and my heart raced as I recalled my meeting with the private investigator 2 weeks prior. He had shared the findings of a 3-year-long investigation, revealing a mountain of evidence that pointed to an affair between my wife, Martha, and Michael's husband, Rachel Kinsley. The investigator even provided a recommendation for a divorce attorney who would eagerly take on Martha's case. With Rachel listing adultery as the reason for her divorce, it felt like all the strategies devised by the team at Willington and Compton to counter my own divorce petition were being thrown out the window. Michael's divorce papers were packed with incriminating evidence, the Pies report, photos, and even videos. It was a complete package that made the situation all the more explosive. As I sat at the head of our 10-person dining room table that night, I poured a glass of Martha's favorite red wine and set it carefully in front of her chair. The garage door rumbled open at 8:10 p.m., marking the 4 hours since Martha had been served. I wondered silently if my meticulous 3 years of planning would overshadow the chaos that had erupted around us. Martha stepped into the house, her expression a mixture of apprehension and feigned composure as she scanned the rooms, first the family room, then my office, and finally the living room. When she finally spotted me in the dining room, her eyes narrowed slightly as she took in the scene. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over to the chair at the far end of the table, sitting down heavily. She reached for the wine glass, offering a quiet thanks before taking a generous sip, clearly needing the comfort. After a few beats of silence, she broke it, her voice steady but tinged with desperation. "I don't want a divorce." "I know," I replied, trying to keep my tone even. "But I can't stay in a marriage with a woman who's had an affair. Chris, please, let's talk like adults. Yes, I've made mistakes, but I'm not the person you think I am. Not the person I think you are? I interjected, unable to contain my incredulity. You've told me countless times that only a fool would allow a man to treat her like that. Those are your words, Martha. I knew the irony of my statement would hit hard, but I wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. Martha's face flushed with anger, and I could see the turmoil beneath her carefully constructed facade. Why did you have to ruin Michael's family? He has 2 wonderful children who will now grow up without a father. I couldn't help but stifle a laugh, shaking my head as I replied, have you seen Rachel Kinsley? She's stunning. Those kids will have a new father before long, and I doubt he'll be anything like the cheating husband you've been with. There was a pause as I watched her process my words, and I continued, why should I care about their family? Michael didn't care about mine. I asked you to speak to me like an adult, she shot back, her voice rising. A smirk crept across my face, a reaction I knew would infuriate her. If you don't like my language, you're free to leave. I won't stop you. But to my surprise, Martha didn't move. Instead, she leaned forward, her expression shifting from anger to confusion. How long have you known? Rather than answer directly, I picked up a stack of documents I had prepared before her arrival. I slid a copy of the anonymous letter across the table. Martha opened it and examined the photo attached. Her eyes widened as she read the postmark. 3 years. You've known for 3 years and haven't done anything. I couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Believe me, I've done plenty, Martha. You had a 4-hour meeting at work today to prepare for this conversation. I've had 3 years to get ready for it. A flicker of concern crossed Martha's face, and I could see her resolve begin to crack. For instance, I continued, we haven't been intimate since I found out. Other than a peck on the cheek, we've barely touched. It's been 3 years since we shared a loving hug, and you haven't even noticed. I thought you lost interest in sex, Martha said, confusion coloring her tone. I laughed heartily, the sound echoing through the dining room. I've lost interest in sex with you, Martha. She stared at me, taken aback. Have you really gone 3 years without sex? I grinned from ear to ear. With you? Yes. I've had plenty of sex, just not with you. Martha sank back into her chair, stunned. I have video proof of much of your escapades, too. You don't have the same proof against me. Chris, I love you, she pleaded, desperation lacing her voice. My time with Michael meant nothing. It was just stress relief, especially after you stopped being intimate with me. Don't go there, Martha, I warned, my tone sharpening. Your ongoing 3-year affair is your fault. Don't you dare try to blame me. It took her a full minute to regain her composure. Regardless, I love you. I know you love me, too. You're wrong, Martha, I shot back, the anger bubbling to the surface. For 3 years, you've lied to me. You shattered our wedding vows and cheated on me in the worst possible way. It took time, but I no longer love you. In fact, I don't even like you anymore. Tears streamed down Martha's face as she abruptly jumped to her feet and fled the room. I didn't follow her, I knew she would return. A short time later, Martha walked back in, having changed into jeans and a blouse. She sat down and refilled her glass from the bottle of wine I had left at her end of the table. Chris, you really need to rethink your position. I have a great team at the office, and with the help of an outside divorce attorney, you stand to lose a lot. I couldn't help but chuckle. I know Sharon Brown is a good lawyer, but I've already found glaring mistakes in the petition she prepared. If we can't agree on how to move forward, I'll unleash my team on you. My smiles and laughter were beginning to grate on Martha's nerves, and I could see it in her eyes. She was starting to unravel, and I knew I had to maintain my composure. That's the difference between your team and mine, Martha, I said, leaning back in my chair, ready for whatever was to come next. The dawn of a new chapter awaited me, and I could hardly contain my excitement. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over everything, I turned to Martha, my voice steady but laced with the weight of 3 years of careful planning. "Tomorrow morning, my team will be unleashed," I said, pausing for effect. "For the past 3 years, they've been executing my plan with precision and determination. Your team? Well, they start the war tomorrow. But my team's work? It's done." I let my words hang in the air, watching the realization wash over her. "I'll take you at your word that you love me, but I'm struggling to understand how that's possible after 3 years of deceit. Nevertheless, I'll accept it. I can almost guarantee that by the time our divorce is finalized, you're going to hate my guts. The ironic part? Everything you'll hate me for has already happened, you just don't know about it yet." Martha's face hardened, the anger simmering beneath the surface as she shot back, "You'll never be able to turn our kids against me." Her defiance was palpable, but I held my ground. "I'd never try to turn the kids against you. In fact, I haven't talked to them yet. I plan to call them this weekend, along with both sets of parents and our siblings. I'll explain that I filed for divorce because of your long-term affair. I expect them to treat you with respect, and I hope they'll continue their relationship with you. But ultimately, it's up to them. If anyone doubts the depth of your betrayal, I'll offer to send them the private investigator's report. I suspect you wouldn't want them to see that, so you might want to confirm your affair." Her expression twisted into one of disbelief. Martha hated losing, and she was beginning to realize how far behind she was, losing even more ground with each exchange. Instead of backing down, she lashed out. "I'm going to take your company away from you." I couldn't help but smile. Her threat was the first salvo in what would become the beginning of my calculated dismantling of her. "What company?" I replied, tilting my head as if considering her words. "Precision engineering? You really think you can take that from me?" She looked at me as if I had 2 heads, her expression a mixture of confusion and contempt. "I'm going to take it over." My grin widened as I continued to speak in the most condescending tone I could muster. "Sweetheart, don't you remember? We sold Precision Engineering to the Sweets 2 years ago. That's illegal. The company is a family asset, and I didn't agree to the sale." Her indignation was almost laughable. "Actually, you didn't need to agree to the sale. You granted me a very broad power of attorney for all things related to the company. Your firm drafted that document, and I used the power of attorney to complete the sale and invest the money in overseas accounts, just like you do each year. You personally signed our family tax documents, which clearly listed the sale and the movement of funds. Good luck trying to trace that money after 2 years." Martha sat in shock, her mouth moving like a goldfish gasping for air. Realizing the gravity of my words, she struggled to find a retort. I stood up, leaving her in stunned silence, and walked upstairs to our guest room. Locking the door behind me, I finally allowed the tears to flow. The weight of the past few years washed over me like a tidal wave. The next morning, my alarm jolted me awake at 3 a.m. I climbed out of bed, took a quick shower, and set out for the airport, bound for Florida. My new life was awaiting me. I had purchased a condo on Clearwater Beach, just across the bay from Tampa. This was my fresh start, my opportunity to embrace the single life ahead. I had orchestrated my plan meticulously, expecting it to take Martha and her legal team a few weeks of sifting through documents and financial statements before they realized that nearly $34 million from the sale of Precision Engineering had never come under the jurisdiction of a U.S. bank. Consequently, it wouldn't be included in the divorce settlement. It was a shock, but given the family tradition and history I had behind me, I knew it was a masterstroke. The other half of my plan would unfold in 5 weeks, specifically on the Friday after Thanksgiving. Growing up, Martha had been incredibly close to her maternal grandmother, Edith. Every week, Edith would plan special outings for just the 2 of them. As time passed, Martha took over these plans, making the drive to Port Maine once a month to visit her and bring her back from the assisted living facility. They would share lunch together, and if Edith was feeling well, they would hit the mall. A cherished family tradition that began with Edith was the display of a nearly 175-year-old nativity scene at Christmas. On the Friday after Thanksgiving, Martha would head to our local bank to retrieve the 24 figurines from a large safety deposit box. Each figurine was carefully encased in its own velvet box, a testament to their value and history. Meanwhile, the kids and I would go out to select 2 towering Christmas trees, taking an entire day to decorate our home. The highlight of our festive preparations was the nativity scene, which we set up on a straw-covered table, flanked by the 2 Christmas trees, with 3 rows of poinsettias positioned in front to protect the precious figurines from the curious hands of guests. Once the decorations were complete, Martha would stand in front of the nativity scene, tears streaming down her cheeks. Throughout the holiday season, she often cried whenever she gazed upon it, confiding that it was her happy place, a reflection of all the joys in her life. The scene overwhelmed her with a torrent of past and present memories. We would leave the decorations up until the day before returning to work, when the family would reverse the process, tenderly boxing each figurine and placing them on the kitchen counter. The next day, Martha would stop by the bank on her way to work, returning the boxes to the safety deposit box for safekeeping until the following year. My plan to divorce Martha hadn't taken 3 years to complete. In fact, all but one element was finalized within the first year. For the past 3 years, I had orchestrated a business trip scheduled for the start of the new year. With my flight set to leave around noon, I decided to start my day in my home office rather than the office downtown. For the first 2 years, Martha and I had been living in a carefully constructed facade, but now it was time for the truth to come to light. As the pieces of my life fell into place, I could finally breathe, unburdened and ready to embrace the future. I remember that first day at work vividly. It started off with breakfast together, a simple yet intimate meal that felt like a promise of good things to come. After we finished, I helped Martha carry the box of figurines to her car. She wished me well with an earnest smile and planted a quick kiss on my cheek before heading off to the bank, her usual routine before diving into the daily grind. Last year had finally brought a shift in our routine, a long-awaited change that I had been anticipating for months. As we were dressing that morning, Martha turned to me and asked, "Chris, can you do me a favor?" I glanced across our bedroom, intrigued. "Sure, what is it?" "I expect a mountain of work waiting for me when I get in this morning. Do you think you could take the figurines to the bank before you head to the airport?" I thought for a moment, a smile creeping onto my face. "That'll be easy enough. I'll take care of it." But as fate would have it, things didn't go as smoothly as I had hoped. Just before noon on that Friday after Thanksgiving, I received a text from Martha that set off alarm bells in my mind. "Martha, where the duck are my figurines?" I couldn't help but burst into laughter. I was mid-sip of my coffee when I read her message, and I almost choked. Just then, my neighbor Kate, a 38-year-old divorcee, walked past my bedroom and saw the coffee spray fly from my mouth. She joined in my laughter, her smile infectious. "Do you need to answer that text, or can you give me a quick duck before I leave?" After a quick shower and a hasty dress, Kate gave me a peck on the cheek and left for home. Once she was gone, I reluctantly checked my phone. It was flooded with missed calls and texts from Martha, her family members, and our kids. I didn't want to deal with Martha's drama, but I figured it would be easier to call her back than to face the onslaught of everyone else's messages. When I finally called her, Martha hissed into the phone, "Chris, what took you so long to call back?" "I was ducking one of my neighbors," I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Martha took a moment to gather herself before she continued, "I want my nativity scene, and I want it now." "Sure, just head to the bank and get it, Martha," I said, trying to keep my cool. "Chris, I know you didn't take them back to the bank last year. The last record for accessing the safety deposit box was when I took the figurines out last Christmas." I felt a surge of frustration bubbling inside me. "Why didn't you return them last year? You agreed I would take them to the bank for you. Please, Chris. Just give my treasures back to me. I'm sorry, but you're wrong. I distinctly remember putting the boxes in the trunk of your car before you left for work, just like every other year. Martha's voice trembled as she sobbed, "Oh God, why are you doing this to me? I know you're angry, but why would you be this awful to me? It's amazing how you refuse to take any responsibility for your ducked-up life. Goodbye, Martha." I hung up, my heart heavy. Deciding to address the flood of missed calls, I reached out to everyone who had tried to contact me. I explained, "Martha is trying to stir up problems as our court date approaches." I wasn't sure if anyone believed me, but I was certain no one had any proof that I had her figurines. Our divorce had been finalized 14 months after I filed, a grueling process that Martha fought tooth and nail. She had thrown up roadblock after roadblock, even getting the police and insurance investigators involved in the mysterious disappearance of her precious nativity scene. My only comment on the matter was, as far as I recall, I put all 24 boxes of figurines into the trunk of Martha's car. I would have been shocked if anyone believed me, but they couldn't prove I took her family heirloom. Even after the divorce, Martha and I only saw each other a few times a year at events hosted by our children. We maintained a respectful distance, each of us playing our part in the family dynamic. 14 years after our divorce, I received a call that would change everything. Martha had been battling an aggressive form of breast cancer, a losing battle that was finally nearing its end. When my daughter called and asked if I would visit her mother, I felt a mixture of dread and determination. The next day, I entered Martha's hospice room, my heart heavy with emotion. She looked sleepy, and I found myself watching her for nearly an hour, fighting back tears as memories flooded my mind. I must have been lost in thought because Martha startled me when she spoke. "You were right, you know." I looked up to see the familiar, smiling face of my ex-wife. Of course I was right. But out of curiosity, what are you talking about? Her smile flickered as she spoke. "You told me that my love for you would turn to hate by the end of the divorce. After all the awful things I did to you and our family, I'm embarrassed to admit that I hated you for a long time." "Right back at you, Martha," I said with a wry grin. Her smile returned, and we chuckled together, a moment of genuine connection amidst the pain. "Chris, do you still hate me?" I thought for a moment before answering honestly. "No, for me, hate takes too much energy. I didn't have the strength after a while." Martha nodded in agreement. "I agree. After a while, hate just isn't worth the effort." We talked for nearly 2 hours, sharing stories and laughter, reminiscing about our life together and the moments that defined us. As I was finishing a particularly old tale from our children's youth, I noticed that Martha had fallen asleep. My first inclination was to leave, but as I looked around, I realized that this would likely be the last time I'd see her alive. When she woke up from her hour-long nap, we picked up right where we left off, laughing like fools, lost in our own little world. Just then, our son Brian walked in with his wife Sue and their 3 kids. I could instantly tell that Brian was pleased to see me visiting his mom, a soft smile on his face. I didn't want to overstay my welcome, so I made my farewells, planting a gentle kiss on Martha's cheek as I turned toward the door. "Chris, can I ask you a favor?" I nodded, curious. Martha looked over at Brian. "Would you give your dad and me a moment of privacy?" Brian and Sue quickly gathered up their kids and made a hasty exit, leaving Martha and me alone once more. "I'd like Brian's family and Rose's family to alternate displaying the nativity scene at Christmas," she said, her voice steady yet soft. "Do you think you could help make that happen?" It was Black Friday 2018, a day when many families rushed to the local mall in search of bargains. My family, however, spent the day at my daughter's home. Rose's family, along with Brian and his family, helped me decorate the house, candles flickering and laughter ringing through the air as we prepared for the holiday season. As the holiday season approached, our home transformed into a festive wonderland. Wreaths adorned every window, their greenery a bright contrast to the chilly December air. Lights twinkled on the bushes that hugged the front yard, casting a warm glow in the evening darkness. Each room on the first floor overflowed with Christmas-themed knickknacks, a joyous display of holiday cheer. We unanimously agreed that the crowning achievement of our decorations was Rose's family room, which looked like something straight out of a magazine. In that room, we proudly set up two magnificent 12-foot trees, their branches heavy with ornaments that shimmered in the soft light. Between the trees stood a straw-covered table, a centerpiece of sorts, where 3 rows of vibrant poinsettias formed a protective barrier. Scattered atop the table were the 24 delicate pieces of Martha's nativity scene, each figurine meticulously placed to tell the timeless story of Christmas. As I prepared to leave for the evening, I took one last, lingering look at the nativity. A wave of nostalgia washed over me, and tears began to roll down my cheeks. I couldn't help but remember Martha from so many years ago, standing in front of that same display, tears streaming down her face as she declared it was her happy place. That memory served as a poignant reminder that true conflict resolution requires not just time and self-reflection but also a willingness to compromise and grow. The following morning, John's alarm blared its familiar tune at 6 a.m., heralding the start of another day. The sunlight streamed through the curtains, gently pulling me from the depths of sleep. My wife, Jessica, and our beloved dog, Rose, stirred from their slumber. I groaned, feeling the weight of fatigue settle heavily on my shoulders as I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the bed. "What's with the dramatics? You sound like you're ancient," Jessica teased, her voice playful as she made her way to the bathroom. "After what you put me through last night, I might as well be," I retorted with a smirk, reminiscing about the whirlwind of events that had made the night so memorable. She certainly had a knack for keeping things interesting. Today marked the beginning of Jessica's business trip, leaving me to fend for myself for the next few days. The thought didn't exactly fill me with enthusiasm. The sound of the shower running filled the air, and I briefly considered joining her, but I decided against it. Last night had taken its toll, and I needed a moment to gather myself. Jessica emerged from the bathroom, radiating energy that sharply contrasted with my sluggish demeanor. "Come on, sleepyhead. It's time to rise and shine. We've got bills to pay," she urged, mimicking my earlier groans with a teasing smile. All right, I'm getting there," I mumbled, dragging myself toward the bathroom for some much-needed revitalization. Eventually, we reconvened downstairs for breakfast, savoring the last moments together before parting ways. Jessica was off to the airport, while I braced myself for the daily grind of work. As an attorney, Jessica often traveled for her job, while I worked as an engineer at the same medium-sized manufacturing plant in St. Louis. Today, she would be heading to Denver to negotiate a new subcontract with a major aerospace firm, a task she took on with determination and skill. At 35, Jessica had graduated from State University 12 years prior. Standing at 5 feet 4 inches and weighing 125 pounds, she exuded a striking beauty, with feminine attributes that captured my heart. Her charm was undeniable, and I was completely enamored by her. I'm John Baker, 37 years old, and I stand at 6 feet 1 inch, weighing 165 pounds thanks to my regular workouts. Jessica and I share a passion for golf, often forming a foursome with friends. Our love story began at a company picnic, where I instantly knew she was the one for me. Thankfully, the feeling was mutual. Our whirlwind romance led us to tie the knot just 6 months later. Now, 7 years into our marriage, we had recently purchased our dream home just 3 months ago. It was a place where we envisioned starting our family, with both sets of parents living nearby, their excitement palpable. Jessica planned to transition into a role as a stay-at-home mom once our children reached school age. The anticipation of starting a family together filled our hearts with joy. Jessica intended to discontinue her birth control pills upon returning from this trip, and we both eagerly awaited the next chapter of our lives. After breakfast, I helped Jessica load her travel bag into her car, savoring the bittersweet moment as I bid her farewell with a lingering kiss. I noticed tears welling in her eyes as she settled into the driver's seat. "Hopefully, I won't have to endure these goodbyes much longer, sweetheart," she said, her voice tinged with longing. "I can't stand these partings as much as you do, honey," I reassured her, trying to ease her mind. "I'll see you on Friday evening, and we'll keep it simple with takeout so you can rest." "Sounds good," she replied with a small smile before driving off. I stood in the driveway, waving until her car disappeared from view, then trudged back into the house to finish my morning routine before heading to the office. Upon my arrival at work, I made my way to the engineering department, stopping by the break room to grab a cup of coffee before settling in at my desk. Barely had I sat down when my phone rang. "Baker," I answered. "John, could you step into my office for a moment?" came the voice on the other end. "Sure, Hubert. I'll be right there," I replied, grabbing my coffee and making my way to my boss's office. As I entered, he gestured for me to take a seat. "John, I've got something that might interest you. Since Jessica's away this week, I remembered you mentioning it last Friday. Jay Carter, our field service engineer in California, is out sick and unable to handle a problem a customer in San Jose is facing with one of our models. Given your extensive experience with that particular model, would you be interested in heading out to San Jose to check it out?" "Well, there's not much going on here right now, and you're right, I'm flying solo this week. So when do you need me out there?" I asked, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness at the prospect of a new challenge. "Right away. Let Lucy handle your reservations and tickets. You can give the customer a call to let them know you're on your way and gather more details about the issue." "Sounds like a plan. I'll get on it immediately," I replied, a surge of energy coursing through me at the thought of tackling this new task. With renewed enthusiasm, I decided to head home, pack my bags, catch a flight out this afternoon, and be at the customer's location by tomorrow morning. "Great. Safe travels," Hubert replied, signaling the end of our conversation. Before leaving the office, I made a quick stop at Lucy's desk to brief her on the flights and reservations I needed. Once I had that squared away, I headed back to my desk to call the customer and clarify their issue. With that task completed, I felt a wave of excitement as I left the office, my mind buzzing with a new plan. If I wrapped things up efficiently, I could surprise Jessica with a detour to Denver on my way back. The thought of spending a couple of unexpected days with her in the vibrant city fueled my excitement even further. While waiting for my flight at the airport, I tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but she didn't answer. I left her a voicemail, letting her know that I'd be staying with my folks for a couple of days and asked her to reach me on my cell in the evenings. Everything went smoothly. By Tuesday afternoon, I had resolved the customer issue and had their equipment up and running satisfactorily. Afterward, I quickly arranged a flight to Denver, scheduled to land at 9 p.m. Mountain Time. I checked out of my hotel in San Jose and made my way to San Francisco Airport, where I treated myself to a nice dinner before my flight. During dinner, Jessica called my cell, and we exchanged a brief but sweet conversation. She asked about my parents, and I responded as though I were with them, not wanting to raise any suspicions. Jessica mentioned that negotiations were progressing well but confessed she was feeling exhausted and planned to spend a quiet evening in her hotel room. After sharing sweet expressions of love, we said our goodbyes and I boarded my flight. I arrived at Jessica's hotel around 9:45 p.m. After confirming my identity, the hotel staff handed me a key card to her suite. Quietly entering her room, I noticed a lamp illuminating the space over her closed laptop. However, Jessica was nowhere to be found. Confused, I set down my suitcase and checked the bedroom and bathroom, but both were empty. I shrugged off my initial bewilderment, assuming she hadn't returned yet. I debated whether to wait for her or check the lounge for her whereabouts when something caught my attention, a slightly ajar door to the adjoining room. Curiosity piqued, I approached cautiously. As I opened the door, I peered into the living room of the adjacent suite, finding it empty. Intrigued, I stepped inside but was startled by a sudden groan coming from the bedroom. My stomach twisted in knots, and a cold sweat broke out as I tiptoed toward the bedroom door. My heart raced as I caught sight of what lay before me. In the dimly lit room stood Jessica, completely nude, while an unidentified man lay on the bed, his face obscured from view. My initial instinct was to storm in, confront Jessica, and unleash my fury on the man sprawled on the bed. Yet, rationality won out over the flood of emotions coursing through me, and I slowly retreated from the doorway. Returning to Jessica's suite, I retrieved the digital camera I had brought along to capture souvenirs. I quickly adjusted it for low light, turning off the flash, and with a composed demeanor, I approached the bedroom door once more. Standing quietly, I discreetly captured several images of the scene unfolding before me, ensuring that neither of them noticed my presence. Their obliviousness to the outside world, completely consumed by their actions, allowed me to document the betrayal that shattered my heart. Before leaving Jessica's suite, I rifled through an open briefcase on the table and discovered a business card belonging to David Price, the chief negotiator for our company. I pocketed the card, recognizing its potential importance for future reference. Back in her suite, I connected my camera to her laptop using the interface cable I always carried. Since we both used the same photo program, transferring a picture from my camera to hers was a straightforward task. I set up the incriminating image as her desktop background before repacking my camera into my travel bag and silently exiting her suite. Struggling to contain my emotions, I fought back tears as I made my way to the elevator, the weight of betrayal heavy upon my shoulders. After returning the entry card to the front desk, I promptly contacted the airline to inquire about the next available flight back to St. Louis. Fortunately, there was a 6:30 a.m. flight that would get me home by 9:30 a.m. I calculated that this would coincide perfectly with the time Jessica typically opened her laptop at the negotiating table, serving as the moment she would realize she had been caught, an unceremonious end to our marriage. With a heavy heart, I made my way back to the airport and checked into a nearby motel. Despite my restless state, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. Instead, I replayed the distressing scene from Jessica's hotel room over and over in my mind, allowing myself to release my pent-up anguish through tears. By the time I left the motel at 5 a.m., I felt emotionally drained, my resolve crystallizing to swiftly bring our marriage to an end. As I got into my car, my phone began to ring. Glancing at the caller ID, I saw it was Jessica. Choosing to ignore the call, I turned off my phone and drove home. Upon entering the house, the landline rang, and a quick look at the caller ID confirmed it was Jessica again. I opted to let it go to the answering machine, listening silently as her tearful plea echoed through the room. "John, please call me right away. I need to talk to you, honey. It's important." Ignoring Jessica's heartfelt plea, I headed upstairs to change my clothes, the weight of the world resting heavily on my shoulders as I prepared for the confrontation that awaited me. Here's a longer, more engaging rewrite of your story, adapted for an American audience while retaining the character names. Before heading out to rendezvous with Randy at the hall, I hurriedly packed my belongings, determined to vacate the house before Jessica arrived around 4 p.m. In just a couple of hours, I managed to move all my personal items to a rental storage unit. Prior to that, I had scheduled an appointment with our lawyer for that afternoon to kick off the divorce proceedings. Though I was tempted to cite adultery as grounds for the divorce, I decided to go with irreconcilable differences, keeping the former in my back pocket in case things turned contentious later on. After unloading my belongings at the storage unit, I made my way to the lawyer's office. I wasted no time in requesting immediate action to commence the divorce process. I also instructed the lawyer to update my will, naming my brother as the sole beneficiary. Next, I stopped at the bank, transferring half of our savings and checking account balances into new accounts solely in my name. I knew I had to protect myself. After that, I reached out to Ed, my investment advisor, and instructed him to execute similar actions on our joint investment accounts. With a heavy heart, I drove to my parents' house, suitcase in hand, and entered through the open door. "John, where have you been?" my mother exclaimed upon seeing me. "Jessica has been calling here several times looking for you. Did you tell her you were staying here?" I settled down with my retired father and explained the situation to them. Their faces reflected shock and disbelief as they absorbed the news of Jessica's infidelity and the impending end of my marriage. Seeking refuge, I asked if I could stay with them temporarily until I found a furnished apartment, and they readily agreed. My estimation of timing was spot on. Just as we were settling down for dinner around 6 p.m., the doorbell chimed. My father rose to answer it, returning moments later with a visibly distressed Jessica trailing behind him. "John, why haven't you been answering my calls?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling. "I needed to talk to you. You've moved all your belongings out of the house." I replied calmly, "I would have thought the message I left on your desktop would have provided all the information you needed." "Oh God, I was so afraid. Can we please go somewhere and talk, sweetheart?" Jessica pleaded, desperation lacing her words. "Jessica, I'm no longer your sweetheart, and there's nothing left for us to discuss. I've already initiated divorce proceedings, and anything that needs to be communicated can be handled through our lawyers. What I witnessed in Denver shattered any feelings I had for you, and I need you to leave so I can finish my dinner," I stated firmly. "Please, John, don't do this without talking to me," she implored, her voice quaking with emotion. "What could you possibly say to justify your infidelity?" I retorted, my tone unwavering. "It certainly wasn't an act of violence like the one I witnessed, and have evidence of. You better call your lover, David, and inform him that I'll be dealing with him tomorrow. Perhaps his wife will have a different perspective on the matter than I do." "Oh God, can we talk, please?" Jessica pleaded again, her voice trembling. "Please go, Jessica. My dinner is getting cold," I replied, my resolve solid. "But I'll offer you this, why don't you take some time to write me a long letter explaining how you rationalized breaking your wedding vows? I'm sure a lawyer as smart as you can articulate how it was all my fault and how you can still love and respect me very much." With a sob, Jessica turned away, but before she reached the door, she glanced back at me. "Please, John, don't end our marriage without talking to me." "Goodbye, Jessica," I said, my tone resolute. After she left, still in tears, my parents remained seated, stunned by the exchange. "That was awfully harsh," my mother remarked. "Mom, do you want to see the pictures I have of her and her lover?" "That's what's harsh," I replied bluntly. "She completely disrespected me, and I can't live with that. I can never trust her again." "I understand, son," my father finally spoke up. "Maybe if things calm down a little, you might see things differently." "I don't think so, Dad. Let's talk about something else so I can finish my meal," I said, eager to change the subject. "Okay, son," my father agreed reluctantly. As I left home that Monday morning, a pang of sadness washed over me at the thought of leaving everything behind. However, I couldn't help but feel a surge of excitement about the prospect of starting a new life. I envisioned a future with someone who truly valued me. We had patiently prepared ourselves, making sure we were financially and professionally ready to embark on this new chapter. Now, everything seemed to be falling into place. The journey to Denver passed without incident. I found myself seated next to David Price, our chief negotiator, with whom I shared a comfortable rapport. We briefly discussed the upcoming negotiations before diving into more personal topics, like our families. David was aware of my plans to leave work once I became pregnant, and he expressed his sentiments about missing me when I transitioned to being a full-time mother. At 48, and married for 2 decades with children in high school, David had experienced a lot in life. Long before my marriage, he and our other team member had formed a strong negotiating duo, and their camaraderie was evident. The other two members of our team engaged in their own conversations behind us, but David and I had always been in sync. Upon arriving at the hotel in Denver, David and I checked into adjoining rooms. This arrangement had initially been made for late-night strategy meetings during negotiations, but about 10 years ago, our relationship took a different turn. We had convinced ourselves that engaging in intimacy was merely a way to relieve stress after a demanding day of negotiations. At that time, we rationalized that it wasn't considered cheating on his wife if it contributed to our professional success. Occasionally, we even joked about it. However, after John and I had been married for a couple of years, I began to feel uneasy about my intimate interactions with David. I wrestled with the internal conflict, wondering if my actions had crossed a line I had previously dismissed. It felt like I was juggling two lives, and the guilt was starting to weigh heavily on my conscience. As I sat in the hotel room, preparing for the upcoming negotiations, I couldn't shake the feeling that my choices were leading me down a path I couldn't return from. I needed to make a decision, not just for myself, but for the future I envisioned. And as I glanced at my phone, the weight of my past began to loom over me like a storm cloud ready to burst. As the days rolled on, I had gradually distanced myself from the intoxicating yet precarious dance I'd been engaged in with David. The thrill of it had started to fade, but during a particularly stressful round of negotiations, David brought up the idea of revisiting our arrangement. Hesitantly, I agreed, and before I knew it, I was once again caught in the whirlwind of excitement and danger. The allure of the forbidden stirred something deep within me, amplifying my emotions in a way that was both exhilarating and unnerving. Strangely, it even seemed to lift John's spirits at home, easing the weight of concern that had been resting on my shoulders throughout this trip. Our first night together was quiet. Fatigue settled heavily on me after a long day of intense negotiations, leaving little room for connection. However, the following evening, I found myself drawn to meet with David again. Little did I know, the real storm was brewing just beneath the surface. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but the allure of the thrill momentarily clouded my judgment. It wasn't until the next morning that the storm broke in the most unexpected way. When I opened my laptop, I was confronted by an image that froze me in place, paralyzing me with disbelief. There it was, David, seated beside me in a moment that should have remained our secret, captured in a compromising position. Before I could process what I was seeing, David slammed the lid of my laptop shut, a look of fury on his face. We retreated to the hallway, where his anger simmered just beneath the surface. "What's that mess on your desktop?" he demanded, his voice laced with urgency. "I have no idea, David. It wasn't there the last time I used it," I stammered, still reeling from the shock. "Let me see," he insisted, reopening the laptop. Together, we stared at the image in stunned silence. "Oh no, that's you," he exclaimed, disbelief etched across his features. "What? How is that even possible?" I replied, my heart racing. "I don't know, but it's definitely you, and that figure beneath you is probably me, even if my face isn't visible. Did you leave your laptop unattended at any point yesterday?" he pressed. "No. I had it with me the entire time," I responded, my mind racing. "You need to return to the hotel and check if anyone accessed your room last night," he urged. "I'll handle things here. Try to contact John and find out where he was. It couldn't have been him. I spoke to him at his parents' house last night," I said, grasping at any semblance of hope. "Did you call him on his parents' phone?" David asked. "No, he asked me to use his cell," I replied, feeling a sense of dread wash over me. "That's concerning. He could have been anywhere when you talked to him. Call me on my cell if you find out anything." With that, I felt my heart sink further. If John had something to do with the picture on my laptop, it felt like a death knell for our marriage. I needed to gather more information, and the weight of panic settled heavily on my chest. As I made my way back to the hotel, my mind raced with thoughts of John and what this all meant. The receptionist hailed a cab for me, and within minutes, I was back at the hotel. I approached the front desk, my stomach in knots, and inquired if anyone had accessed my suite. After checking the records, the clerk's face turned grave as she informed me, a Mr. John Baker was issued a card last night at 9:45, which was returned about half an hour later. The gravity of that information hit me like a punch to the gut. The man I loved more than anything had vanished, and I was left grappling with the fear that my marriage was on the brink of collapse. But I couldn't give up that easily. I resolved to fight for what I cherished. As I reached the elevator, I dialed John's cell and his workplace, but my heart sank when I realized his phone was switched off. Desperate, I left an urgent voicemail, pleading for him to contact me. His secretary informed me that John was away on business in California and wouldn't return until the next day. Panic set in further. Had he gone to California and perhaps decided to surprise me on his way back? It seemed we were both in for a surprise. I contacted his parents, hoping for some insight into his whereabouts. They hadn't seen him for days. I urged them to have him call me as soon as they reached him. Calling our home yielded no response, but I left a message there too, desperately hoping to hear back soon. Alone in the suite, tears streamed down my face as I realized my only option was to return home. With trembling hands, I grabbed the phone and hastily made reservations for the next flight to St. Louis. After packing my belongings, I dialed David's number to relay the latest developments. "Jessica, I fear we're both staring down the barrel of divorce, or even worse." David's voice trembled through the line. "What could possibly be worse than that?" I asked, my heart racing. "Our company strictly prohibits relationships between employees at the managerial level. If this gets out, we could both be looking at termination," he explained, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. Oh my goodness, I should have realized. But losing John feels like the end of the world. Losing my family would be devastating too, I confessed, my heart racing. "But your priority now is to return to St. Louis and try to reason with John. See if you can salvage the situation. I've already booked a flight departing at noon, and I should be back by 4:30, David said, his voice steady yet filled with concern. "I need to find him and talk to him," I replied, determination surging through me. "Keep me posted on how it unfolds," he said, and we exchanged farewells before hanging up. Gathering my bag and laptop, I hastened down to the lobby to check out and utilized the hotel's limo service to reach the airport. As I traveled back to St. Louis, I prayed fervently, hoping against hope to engage John in a conversation. I needed him to understand that it had been a momentary lapse, a physical encounter devoid of emotional attachment. Upon my return home, everything seemed eerily normal at first glance. However, when I stepped into our bedroom, the absence of his clothes and personal belongings sent a shiver down my spine. It became painfully clear, he knew, and he had left me. After several fruitless phone calls, I resolved to visit his parents' house, hoping to uncover any leads on his whereabouts. When I finally encountered him at his parents' place, the coldness and detachment in his demeanor struck me like a physical blow. As he delivered the news of his intention to file for divorce, it felt like my heart shattered into a million pieces. The brutal lack of emotion in his words cut deeper than any betrayal ever could. In this gripping tale of betrayal and heartbreak, we explore themes of empathy, personal choice, and the devastating consequences of infidelity. John's world shatters when he learns of his wife Jessica's affair with David Price, a colleague whose actions have dismantled the future he envisioned. The day began like any other, but as I received a text from my private investigator, my heart sank. He stated, quite plainly, that he had no interest in discussing the situation further, asserting that nothing I could say would change his mind. His suggestion to write a lengthy letter detailing my perspective felt like the final twist of the knife. Defeated, I excused myself and retreated to my car, where the weight of my emotions finally hit me. Tears streamed down my face as I realized that the life we had dreamed of building together was crumbling before my very eyes. The family we envisioned would never come to be, we would not share the joys of growing old together or revel in the delight of watching our grandchildren grow. Amidst this personal despair, a selfish fear gnawed at me, the haunting thought that by the time I found another partner, I might be too old to conceive children. Eventually, I mustered the strength to start the car and drive back to our now desolate home, engulfed by a profound sense of loss and uncertainty. That night was restless, my sleep was plagued by unsettling visions of Jessica entwined with David, their betrayal a cruel mockery of my trust. I rose early the next morning, determined to confront the painful reality of my situation. Making my way downstairs to my parents' home, I brewed a strong cup of coffee to shake off the heaviness that enveloped me. With a heavy heart, I retrieved my laptop and camera, resolved to sift through the images stored within. I was fixated on the desperate need to identify David among those pictures. As I scrolled through the photographs, I found his face maddeningly indistinct. Yet, my perseverance finally paid off. I noticed a distinct detail on his right arm as it reached toward Jessica's chest. Zooming in, I discovered the tattoo I had been searching for, a heart with the name Janet inscribed inside it. Janet was David's wife. With this damning evidence in hand, I returned upstairs, showered, and prepared for work. When I descended again, my mother was already bustling about, preparing breakfast. I left without eating, fueled by a sense of purpose. At work, I wasted no time. I burned a couple of CDs containing the incriminating photos and printed multiple sets, assembling everything into a folder. With resolve coursing through me, I strode to the Human Resources Department and requested to see the manager, Chad. We were acquaintances in our relatively small company and had even shared a round of golf together. I placed the set of photos from my folder in front of him and awaited his reaction. "What's this?" Chad asked, a mixture of curiosity and amusement on his face. "Are these pornographic pictures?" "Sorry, Chad," I replied, swallowing hard. "They may seem explicit, but that's my wife and David Price. As you can see from the date and time stamps, these were taken Tuesday evening in David's hotel suite in Denver. They were there for a negotiation trip on behalf of the company." "Oh damn, John. I'm really sorry to hear that. What do you want to do about it?" I leaned in, determined. "You can terminate both of them for cause under the anti-fraternization clause in their contracts with the company. We've never enforced that before, but are you certain you want to proceed? This will expose the affair to everyone, and does this mean you're pursuing a divorce from Jessica?" "I've already instructed my lawyer to start drafting the papers," I said, my voice steady. "But if you choose not to act on this, I'll have no choice but to take legal action against the company." "Okay, John. I'll bring this to our legal department and initiate the process," Chad replied. Afterward, I wanted to speak with my boss, Hubert, to update him on the turmoil in my personal life. He reacted appropriately, expressing shock and concern upon hearing about my wife and David Price. When I requested the remainder of the week off, he readily granted it, recognizing that I needed time to process this upheaval. Before parting ways, he commended me for my excellent work during my recent trip to California, relaying positive feedback from a customer about my swift resolution of their issues. Hubert even floated the idea of me taking over the California territory, as the current field engineer was retiring due to health reasons. I promised to consider it and get back to him upon my return to work the following week. As I exited Hubert's office, his secretary Lucy intercepted me. "John, your wife was here looking for you. She mentioned she would return later." "Lucy, under no circumstances do I want to see my wife. Please convey this to her when she comes back," I said, my voice firm. "Oh John, I'm so sorry. I had no idea there was an issue," she replied, her concern evident. "There's a big problem, Lucy. We're getting divorced. She and David Price have been involved." I anticipated that word would spread throughout the plant by noon, given Lucy's penchant for gossip. Returning to my desk, I dialed Janet Price, David's wife. Though we had crossed paths at company picnics, I knew that my revelations about our spouses could weigh heavily on her. "Janet, it's John Baker. How are you?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "John. David mentioned you might be getting in touch, but he didn't say why," she replied. "Janet, we need to talk as soon as possible." "Of course, John. Can you come over now? I have a hair appointment at 1 o'clock this afternoon, but I'm free at the moment." "Do you still live on Elm Street?" "Yes, that's right," she said. "All right, I know where you live. I'll be there in 15 minutes. As I arrived at the Price's home, a sense of apprehension washed over me. I contemplated the daunting task ahead. I knew I couldn't let David evade the consequences of his actions, leaving Jessica to bear the brunt alone. "Hi John. Come on in. Would you like some coffee? I just brewed a fresh pot," Janet offered, gesturing towards the living room. "That would be great, Janet. Just black, please." She returned shortly with the coffee and settled into a chair opposite me. "Now what's this about?" she inquired, her curiosity piqued. I briefly entertained the idea of delivering the news gently but ultimately opted for a direct approach, eager to get it over with. "Janet, I have something difficult to tell you. I caught your husband and my wife together in Denver, and I'm in the process of—" As I spoke, I realized that the weight of this conversation could not only change our lives forever but also alter the trajectory of our families. The impact of infidelity rippled outward, and I was ready to confront the storm that lay ahead. John could hardly believe the news he had just received about Jessica and David. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but a close friend had come forward, sharing details that would soon become public. "I hate to be the bearer of such news, John," Alfred said, his voice heavy with concern. "But it's going to come out soon, and I wanted to prepare you for it. I have photographic evidence if you want to see it." John studied Alfred's face, looking for any hint of exaggeration or falsehood, but was taken aback by Alfred's calm demeanor. "I suppose I've had my suspicions about David's behavior during his business trips for some time now," he replied slowly. "I always hoped they weren't true. David has always been a loving husband and father, and I didn't want to confront the possibility of betrayal. But I realized something would eventually come to light." He paused, steeling himself for the next words. "I suppose this is it." "I'm truly sorry for what you're going through with your marriage," Alfred said, his eyes filled with empathy. "And I'm sorry for the potential consequences for David. At his age, finding another job with comparable pay could be quite challenging." "Now I need to figure out what to do next," John said, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Would you like a copy of the photographs I have?" "Yes, please. Just leave them," Janet replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll gather the courage to look at them." "I'm really sorry, Janet. I couldn't let this slide," John confessed, his voice heavy with sorrow. "Jessica and I were on the verge of starting a family, but I can't build a future with someone I can't trust or respect. The mother of our children needs to have both of those qualities." "I understand, John," Janet replied, her eyes filled with compassion. "Thank you for being honest with me. I wouldn't want to hear about it from anyone else first. And let me reiterate how sorry I am about what you're dealing with regarding Jessica. I'm sure she's just as devastated and regretful as David will be when he finds out that I know about his affair." John nodded, recognizing the weight of their shared pain. "I only wish it were a one-time mistake. That would be easier to forgive. But I fear this has been ongoing for years, and that's a bitter pill to swallow." "I have my pride, and I need to hold my head high," Janet said, her voice tinged with sadness and resolve. "If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to ask." As John prepared to leave and head back to his parents' house, he reflected on the past 6 months. This morning, he had received the finalized divorce agreement, officially ending his marriage to Jessica. He hadn't spoken to her or laid eyes on her since that fateful day when she visited his parents' home. His lawyer had handled everything, from the negotiations to the settlement. In a bid to sever all ties, John relinquished a heavily mortgaged house along with its financed furniture and furnishings. He even had his name removed from the mortgage, leaving Jessica solely responsible for the payments. With no steady income, she had no choice but to put the house up for sale, ultimately taking a significant financial hit in the process. At first, Jessica attempted to contest the divorce, but John had issued her an ultimatum: either sign the papers within 48 hours or he would amend the grounds for divorce to adultery and release the incriminating photographs online. Under pressure, she acquiesced within the stipulated time frame, which was why John now considered himself a free man. It seemed she decided that she didn't want him badly enough after all. Although she lost her job as a result of the affair, Jessica was shrewd and quickly found a new position within a month. It may not have offered the same salary or benefits, but she was managing to get by and had even started dating again. Best of luck to her new boyfriend, whoever he may be, John thought bitterly. He couldn't help but wonder if she had disclosed the details of their divorce and the reasons behind it to him. Maybe it was time he enlightened him himself. Janet, on the other hand, had divorced David and left him financially drained. Despite losing his job, David managed to find new employment, though his current salary made it difficult for him to meet his alimony and child support obligations. As for John, he had settled in Santa Maria, California, a serene coastal town located halfway between the Bay Area and Los Angeles. He made the move about 4 months ago, and now resided in an apartment complex filled with singles and young couples, many of whom were saving up for their own homes. Housing prices in the area were steep, making entry into the market quite costly. In this new chapter of his life, John found companionship with a woman who also lived in the complex. Like him, she was divorced, and they discovered comfort and compatibility in each other's company. They were taking things slow, exploring the possibility of a future together. Given John's frequent travel schedule, trust was paramount in any potential relationship, especially if they were considering starting a family. The ticking of his biological clock served as a constant reminder that time waits for no one. It prompted him to consider making a move sooner rather than later, knowing that the future was uncertain yet filled with new possibilities.